All the Young Dudes, Peter's Perspective by Lanky Idiot. Chapter 2. First Year, The Hogwarts Express. They boarded the train and a friendly conductor in robes half smiled at them as they squeezed past. James led Peter down the narrow corridor of the train cars. Once Peter's mother was out of sight, his nausea returned to him with full force. He walked a little slowly behind James, who never let his wrist go as he led the way. "James, I don't feel so good," Peter managed to get out, and James understood at once. He nodded and walked a little more quickly, excusing them both as he pushed through the crowd. There were dozens of people surrounding them, and Peter was feeling a little claustrophobic as they made their way. Peter noticed James peering into every car, trying to find one that wasn't completely full like most of them were. James knew Peter well enough to know that he may very well get sick, and Peter was sure James didn't want anyone to see it if it happened. "Don't worry, Petey. We will sit down in just a minute, and I'm sure you'll feel much better." Peter wasn't sure, but he wasn't going to argue. His mouth tasted metallic, like it does when you know you're about to puke, and he focused on that instead. The morning hadn't been very eventful, but it was all too much for Peter. The thought of not seeing his friends again, of not sleeping in his own bed, and not seeing his mother every day was finally hitting him, and he desperately wanted to go away. Peter tuned out all of the noises around him, watching and focusing on James' shoes. He nearly crashed into James when he stopped suddenly. He had poked his head into a mostly empty compartment and was talking to the boy inside. The boy inside looked rough, and Peter immediately wanted to shrink into nothing. Why did James have to pick the car with one of the roughest-looking boys Peter had ever seen? Peter barely heard the other boy's name, Remus, before James opened the door further. He dropped Peter's wrist and was already stepping in when he asked, "Can we sit here? Everywhere else is full, and Peter's getting train sick." "I'm not," Peter murmured, and plopped himself down on the seat across from Remus. His hands fell into his lap, and he began absentmindedly picking at his pants. He didn't look up again. He felt like if he looked at the boy he wouldn't be able to stop staring, which he knew was rude. From first glance he noticed the other boy had scars and a black eye. What sort of boy shows up to the first day of school with a black eye? Peter noticed the train start to lurch forward, and he pressed himself against the bench he was sitting on and closed his eyes. He let the gentle shaking of the moving train flute his senses. He listened to James' attempt to make conversation. "Know what house you'll be in?" James asked Remus, to which Remus didn't reply. If it had been Peter asking the questions and Remus wasn't replying, he would have given up. In moments like this, he wished James wasn't so friendly. Rosie and Jane wouldn't have dragged Peter into this compartment to begin with, and they certainly wouldn't be engaging such a scary-looking boy in conversation. "What were your parents in?" James precised. "Did they go to Hogwarts?" "My dad did. I don't know what house, though. My mom didn't. She was a muggle?" Peter looked up finally, staring directly at the other boy. He'd known muggles, and he was constantly surrounded by purebloods, wizards, but Remus was something in between, and Peter was now curious. He hadn't been the most friendly. Maybe he should have been. Was he allowed questions? The boy didn't seem to be a question answerer, but perhaps if Peter tried. "You're a half-blood?" That wasn't how he'd meant to come out, but by the way Remus shrugged, he knew it must have surrounded horrendous. His mother would have been more offended by his manners than the fact he was consorting with a half-blood. "Shut up, Peter Grew," James scolded, shooting him a surf look, as if it even matters. Peter opened his mouth to apologize, but he was cut off by the door opening and another boy looking between the three of them. Thankfully, he wasn't as scary looking as Remus was. "None of you are related to me, are you?" the boy asked, and Peter shook his head in response. James stood up at once, like a proper host, and extended his hand to the new boy. "Don't think so," James answered, a huge grin spread across his face. "James Potter." The dog-haired boy shook James' hand and smiled back. "Oh, good, a Potter. Dad told me not to talk to you." He even took a seat next to Remus and glanced between them all. Sirius Black. Peter felt a little out of place between the other boys, and he wasn't even the half-blood. He felt a little bit sorry for Remus, even if he would never say it out loud. He looked very shabby where Sirius, James, and Peter were put together. His accent wasn't as proper as theirs either, and Peter had a feeling he'd come from somewhere that they didn't care about appearance at all. "So, where do you lads think you'll end up?" James asked the other boys, but mostly because he liked to talk about Gryffindor, and he hadn't even been sorted yet. "I'm hoping for Gryffindor." Peter was happy to have someone else that James could have this conversation with. Peter had spent the entire summer having to listen to James talk about Gryffindor when Peter was fairly certain that wasn't the house he'd be sorted into. He didn't feel brave or daring or determined. "Gryffindor? Really?" Sirius asked, pulling a face, and Peter held his breath. He was sure James would chastise him for it, but James didn't even hesitate before replying. "Yeah, my dad was a Gryffindor. I think it's the coolest, don't you?" Peter hoped Sirius hadn't meant it to be offensive. Gryffindor did seem like the coolest house by far, even if Peter wasn't sure he belonged there. "I do. I want to be in Gryffindor too, James." Peter did think he wanted to be a Gryffindor. He mostly didn't want to be separated by James. He was quite certain he would be a Gryffindor. Peter wasn't sure he would be able to make friends on his own, but he wouldn't be able to handle seeing James become the spectacular student, friend, Quidditch player he was meant to be from the sidelines when they'd been so close their whole life. "What's a Gryffindor?" Remus asked, finally speaking up. "Oh, now he's done it," Peter thinks, letting out a little groan as James' eyes lit up. James sits forward and scrubs his hand through the wild hair before speaking. "So, Gryffindor is all about loyalty, bravery, honor." Peter sighs, shoulders slouching a little as he's reminded once again why he won't fit into that house. James loses a little enthusiasm, but he continues explaining the other houses for Remus' sake. "Hufflepuff is all about acceptance. They're really kind, I suppose, and they've got a lot of hidden talent, I think. Ravenclaws are really clever. Their house is all about brains and creativity, I suppose." James pauses, and Peter looks at him, a little confused. James taps his chin dramatically, and it's clear he's trying really hard to come up with some nice things to say about Slytherin. "And Slytherin, well, they're supposed to be cunning, I suppose. Don't really understand how that's different from being smart, but they're ambitious too, honestly. A lot of dark wizards have come from Slytherin. Almost all of them, actually." James looks up at Remus, who'd stopped paying attention. "I'd steer clear if I were you, mate." Peter nods in agreement. "Slytherin is probably scary. Peter would hate to be put into that house. He couldn't imagine himself being seen as evil or dark." "Reckon I'll be in Slytherin," Sirius says, and Peter tunes back into the conversation. James looks away from Remus and back to Sirius, shaking his head sadly in confusion. "Aw, come on, surely not." James' tone was familiar. It was like when he'd been trying to reassure Peter he wouldn't become a Hufflepuff. Nobody was really convinced. Even Peter's father was probably expecting him to become a Hufflepuff. "My whole family's in Slytherin. Big tradition. Hasn't been a black in another house for about 500 years, Sirius said, shrugging slightly. Peter couldn't imagine what Sirius' family must be like, but now that he thought about it, he was pretty sure his mother had mentioned the name Black before. They're a powerful, wealthy family, apparently. They must be evil, Peter thought, or they wouldn't have 500 years' worth of Slytherin in their family tree. The air was a bit heavy with awkward tension, but James wasn't one to let that get the best of him. "Oh, sorry, mate. I didn't realize." Well, cheers. I'm sure there are plenty of cool Slytherins. My family just a bit spiritual to Gryffindor, that's all." Peter was a little astonished how easy the save came to James. He would have been blundering and stammering nervously by now. "Nah, don't worry about it. My family's the worst," Sirius said, and then forced a laugh, and James laughed with him. How bad must they be if he thinks they're the worst? Surely he doesn't really hate his own family. "I'm sure I'll get stuck in Hufflepuff," Peter complained, allowing himself to whine about it one last time because soon he would have the answer, one way or another, and this felt like his last chance. "Now come on, Pete, don't be like that. Hufflepuff's cool too. All the houses are great." James trailed off, but Peter knew him too well and knew he meant to finish with, "except for Slytherin," but when the phrase didn't follow, Peter sighed. There was more ruckus in the hallway as they neared Hogwarts, students getting ready and gathering their items, but their compartment grew quiet for the first time since they started their journey. Peter was a little grateful for the quietness. James was practically buzzing again, his legs was bouncing in anticipation. Peter watched as Sirius stared at Remus while staring out the window. Peter decided not to do the same, though he was still curious about all Remus' scars and the black eye. He thought the poor boy only needed one pair of eyes staring at him.